All right, you guys ready for a new series? This is good. It's called Stuck Between. This is how we are feeling. We are stuck between living a life that we have lost and living a life that is yet to come, but we have no idea what it's going to look like or what it's going to be. We had lots of hope for it, and then all of a sudden you guys all show up to church with masks on again. It's like, I thought we were done with this, but we're not done with it. Isn't that kind of the way that life just works, right? You know, I've heard from people, this is not my experience, that once you get the kids out of your house, you feel like you're done with it, but then they come back, right? It happens. It just happens. You never know what life is going to bring. You never know what is in store for you. You can have all the plans in the world, but what's the saying, right? Show God your plans, and what will He do? This tells me if you're an optimist or a pessimist. A lot of people here are saying, well, He'll laugh at you. That happens sometimes. He'll bless them, maybe if you're an optimist. There's all kinds of things. Now, the question is, when we are stuck here, right where we are, in this in-between space, where is God? Where is He? A lot of us have been asking that of our, just kind of in our own quiet time. Where are you, God? What is happening here? We all have different things that precipitate that, right? Most of it stems from reading the internet. It's just what happens, or watching the news. But the serious things happen from what happens in our lives, in ourselves, in our heads, in the relationships that we have with the people that are closest to us. We wonder where God is. I have good news for you today. God is right here with you. He has always been right here with you. He will always continue to show up to be with you. And in the middle of that, He will give you peace and He will give you hope. Now, maybe you don't believe me right away. That's okay. We're going to get there. We've got 6 weeks to get there, if you give me that much time, I suppose. But I'll take the next 10 minutes and we'll start there, all right? We are going to follow God's people through the Exodus journey. Maybe you haven't thought about this in a while. Maybe you've never heard of the Exodus journey before. But this episode in the history of humanity, outside of Jesus' actual life and death and resurrection, is the defining era of human history. This time when God reached down into Egypt and took the people who were enslaved and rescued them out of slavery, brought them into freedom, gave them an identity, told them He would be their God and they would be His people, has changed the course of human history. But it wasn't without a lot of suffering. You see, the whole Exodus journey, if we just think of it as a beginning and an end, we forget about the whole middle. And where is life lived? It's lived in the middle. It's lived in this place where you are stuck between a beginning and an end. And the Exodus journey truly is a time, a long, long time, where God's people were just stuck. You are not alone. You are not alone in the way that you are feeling. This has all happened in a little bit different way. It's all happened before. Well, let's see how this is going to work. We long for what was lost, and we can't see what lies ahead. Is this where you feel where you've been at for a while? You've been wondering when things are going to change. You've been wondering when things are going to get better. Where is the end of this road that we are on? It's getting harder and harder to identify, I think. It's getting harder and harder to understand what is normal. It's getting harder and harder to remember what normal was, right? We asked one of our children this week if he remembered going to school without mask on. He didn't. Hasn't been that long, but I mean, when your life is only 12 years old and like at least a tenth of it has been going to school with a mask on, it's a long time, right? Do you remember what you were doing when you were 12? A lot of chuckles here and snorts. Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to get back to. It's hard to think back. It's hard to remember. And this is just how we are as human beings. God knows this. And this not being able to remember part of humanity plays a huge role in the Exodus story, just like it does today. So what happens during the Exodus? Well, here is basically where we're going to start, all right? Everything begins with an escape from Egypt. So the story starts with Jacob. Jacob has 12 sons. One of the sons' name is Joseph, and Andrew Lloyd Webber made this great musical about Joseph in the Technicolor Dreamcoat, correct? Yes, we're all familiar. Okay, good. So you've heard the story was pretty good that he told, right? It's pretty good biblically. Joseph gets taken to Egypt, and through a myriad of circumstances ends up basically running the entire country. He is in a position where he then, when his whole family is experiencing famine, gets to bring them down to Egypt, save them from death, and give them a brand new land, a brand new hope. However, Joseph is not the Pharaoh. He is not the one in charge. He's just running everything. And over time, the Pharaoh enslaves Joseph's and his brother's family. They become slaves in Egypt. And for 400 years, this is how they exist until God comes to a man named Moses, or Charlton Heston, depending on your generational divide, and says, you're going to go tell Pharaoh that I'm going to set my people free. You're going to go before Pharaoh and say, let my people go. And Moses does this. And he goes to Pharaoh and says, let my people go. And what does Pharaoh say? That's actually wrong. If you go back to Scripture, Pharaoh says, okay, I'll let them go. This is Bible trivia for you. But as soon as the people start to move, Pharaoh says, no, that's a bad idea. And he calls them back. Every time Pharaoh says, okay, fine. Why? Because every time Pharaoh says no, God sends a plague. Turns the Nile into blood, sends frogs and locusts and all these crazy things that just devastate the people. And so Pharaoh gives in for a moment, then realizes that, wait a second, Pharaoh thinks, I am God. I'm the one in control. I will do what I want. I will make this land mine, and takes them back. So finally, after 10 plagues, after Pharaoh's own firstborn son is killed on this night of the Passover, Pharaoh says, all right, you can take them. I'm broken. Side note, how far does God have to push you to break you? Pharaoh lets the people go. Moses and Aaron lead them out of Egypt. They start walking out of the land. And this is where we pick up the story. Pharaoh isn't done with them yet. He's going to chase after them. And we get to this famous, famous place where Moses stands next to the Red Sea, opens his arms wide, and the sea parts. The people walk through on dry land to the other side, and when Pharaoh's army chases them, what happens? The waters crash over. The army is defeated. The people are safe. The story has ended. Everything is all right in the world. And what happens when fairy tales end? What do we say? And they lived happily ever after. That is where our story picks up, because they do not live happily ever after. They escape from Egypt, and then they are exposed. They're naked. They're afraid. They have no food. They have no water. They have no direction. Life was good about 2 years ago. Yes? Life was pretty good. For most of us, anyway. Where are we now? We're in a time of incredible uncertainty. We're living between two ends. We don't know when exactly, but we know what life used to be like. We're stuck in this middle part where things don't seem happily ever after, where they're uncertain, where we are exposed, we're afraid. We wonder how we're going to be taken care of. We wonder what the path is ahead of us. We feel like we need to escape. This is where we are today, too. In the middle of this, God shows up. He shows up in a mighty, mighty way. When Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them by way of the land of the Philistines, though that was near. This is Exodus chapter 13. For God said, lest the people change their minds when they see war and return to Egypt, we're going to go a different direction. For God led the people around by the way of wilderness toward the Red Sea. So as they were getting to the Red Sea before the waters parted, they had a chance to go around the easy way. They could have gone north. They could have gone right by the Mediterranean Sea. It would have been very quick to get to the promised land that way. Very easy, very quick, a nice journey. It's like when you have a choice of paths when you're hiking, right? You go to a state park and there's like 12 different hiking paths. Which one do you choose? Well, if you are all prepped and ready to go, if you are a hiker and you've got all your gear and your water and everything on your back ready to go, you take the longest one, the most strenuous one, the one with the best views, right? It's going to be hard, it's going to be long, but that's okay. But if you're just running out of your house with only what you have on your back, if you don't know which way to go, if you're not a hiker, if for generations your people have not been able to hike, you don't know what that is all about, which way do you go? You try to take the easy way, right? You take the half-mile hike that's just a loop, that's barely, you're not going to break a sweat. You're not going to really see anything. You're going to be back just in time to get a snack. And maybe you could do it again if you feel okay. It's easy. God's people could have went that way. But there were already people living there, these Philistines. They would have had to war with them to go through. And God knew that they weren't ready for that. Would it be better to be enslaved than to go to war? And he knew in their hearts that they would not have the courage to do that. They hadn't been made a people yet. They hadn't seen God's provision in an incredible way yet, to know that he would help them win. So God led them through the wilderness. Sometimes we think that we just end up in the wilderness, right? It's just how life happens upon us. But here's something to think about. There might be a reason for going through the wilderness. There might be a reason going through the difficult path, taking the long hike, the one that's hard, the one that's going to challenge you, the one, where the rewards are great. We'll see. We'll see how this works out for the people. They went 3 days in the wilderness, and they found no water. How long can you live without water? Not too long, right? How long can you live without television? Not long. How long can you live without sports, live sports? Not long. How long can you, all these things, right? First world problems, yes. How long can we live without water? Not very long. And they didn't find any. They were going through the wilderness, right? And this was not like northern Illinois wilderness. This was desert wilderness. This was nothing is there. When they came to Marah, they couldn't drink the water at Marah because it was bitter. Therefore, it was named Marah. The Bible is great and explains things like this. Marah in Hebrew just means bitter. And the people grumbled against Moses, saying, "What shall we drink?" Guess what? When you are living in this space between, what do you often do? Grumble. Show me your grumble. Can you grumble for me? Thank you for not saying actual words. Yeah. Complaining, grumbling, it's difficult. The people who 3 days before had seen the Red Sea part were now complaining. Would you do this? You think you wouldn't. But water is important. What shall we drink? And he cried to the Lord, Moses did, and the Lord showed him a log, and he threw it into the water, and the water became drinkable. All of a sudden, they had water to drink. How? Miraculously. Because God provides for them. In the way of the wilderness, in the space between, God provides what we need to keep going. And this keeps happening, right? Even though the people are grumbling and longing for what they had before, even though it was not great, they can't see what's out in front of them. And so they stop. They want to go back. They complain. They don't have a vision of what this promised land could be. So what does the whole congregation of people do? The whole congregation of people of Israel grumble against Moses again, and Aaron this time, while they're in the wilderness. The people of Israel said to them, "Would that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt when we sat by the meat pots and the bread to the full, for you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill the whole assembly with hunger." This is one of the most striking things in all of Scripture to me, that after being enslaved for generations, after just a month or so, you would want to go back. I don't understand it. I don't get it. I think that these people, these Israelites, are different than me. And yet, when we sit with this a little while, when we really think about what that experience would be like when we are stuck in this between space, if not you, we'll say other people for now. You have seen other people clamor for what they have lost. You have seen other people yell and scream and fight and get angry at people that they would never get angry at because they want what they used to have. Then the Lord said to Moses, I'll take care of my people. I'm going to literally send bread from heaven. This is where that whole idea comes from. This is the time when God sent this bread from heaven down to people. And the people will go out and gather a day's portion every day. And through this, I will test them to see whether they walk in my law or not, to see whether they shema, whether they hear who I am, whether they hear it and obey it. God takes care of his people as they grumble. He sends this manna down from heaven. Names in Hebrew are great, right? What does manna mean? Doesn't mean bread, no. It means, quote, what is it? The people looked at it when it came down, and this flaky stuff, and they're like, what is it? We'll just call it, what is it? They weren't creative, but that's okay. Manna means, what is it? They ate this manna for so long. Where did the manna come from? They don't know. God would just send it every single morning, and they were taken care of. They needed food. They needed water. Who gave it to them? Who provided for them in the wilderness, in this between place? Was it exactly what they anticipated? Not at all. But he took care of his people. He showed up. He was there. People are going through the wilderness. They're exposed. They're fearful. But God leads them and provides for them. The last thing that God does for his people is provide for them, or lead them. He shows them the path. He shows them the direction. And in the morning, he would show up to them in a cloud. God would send this pillar of cloud ahead of the people, and it would move in the direction in which they were supposed to go. And at night, that cloud would turn into a pillar of fire and show them where they should rest. All through this time, as they walked, they could see visibly the presence of God with them. How many of you wish that as you're going through this wilderness now that you could have that? So the Israelites had it better than we do? Out in the wilderness? And yet they still grumbled and complained. We want to see the presence of God with us. Where do you see the presence of God with you? Throughout history, God continues to lead his people throughout the wilderness. He continues to be with people who feel naked and afraid. And in the midst of it all, he still leads and he still provides. So this wasn't just about the Exodus journey, but hundreds of years later, when God's people were again taken away in exile, again taken away from their land, again longing for the promised land, he sends the prophet Jeremiah to speak these words. For many of you, these may be your confirmation verses, right? Jeremiah chapter 21, verse 11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you a hope and a future. These are incredible words, right? You can take hope in these today. You can make these, well, I've seen these really powerfully in tattoos, right? Just the name, Jeremiah 29:11. It's there, right on your forearm. So every time you raise your hands to grumble, every time you look ahead, you see that God has planned for you. He is there to prosper you. He is here to give you hope. He is here to remind you that there is a future, even if you can't see how it's going to play out. He is with you in the wilderness. The same God who promised this hundreds of years ago, is the same God who promises it to us today. He keeps coming to people who long for what was lost and can't see what's coming up ahead. Jesus shows us the same thing. Let's fast forward to Jesus' time. there's this incredible time that also was transformational. It's called the Transfiguration. Peter says to Jesus, "You are the Messiah." And Jesus says, "That's right, but keep it under wraps for now. People don't really know what that is yet. You don't even know what that is yet. You're going to have a time where you see and know that I am the Messiah. When I die and rise again 3 days later, you're going to know that that's true." And Peter kind of looks at him questioningly. Jesus is like, "Just wait. Just wait. You can't see what that's going to look like yet. You can't see what lies ahead. But trust me, I will be with you. I will carry you through it. I will do everything for you." And then, after that, he takes these three, Peter, James, and John, up to the mountain. And on this mountainside, all of a sudden, in this incredible vision, Moses and Elijah appear there. There's this huge light, this holiness, where clouds descend. God's voice shows up. The holiness of God is there. Moses and Elijah appear, and they are talking with Jesus. Does this sound like anything that we just heard? The God's presence through a cloud, Moses showing up. The three of them were talking about his exodus. Can you see that up there? In your translation, it doesn't say exodus. It says they were talking about his departure. But in the Greek, the actual word used is exodus. Right here, Jesus is talking about how he is going to go through this wilderness time. He's going to go through this period where he's stuck in between Christmas and Easter. It's going to be difficult. There's going to be a lot of crying and pain and suffering and not knowing how it's all going to end up, but Jesus walks through it. Peter and his companions were very sleepy at the time, but when they became fully awake, they saw this glory and they saw Moses and Elijah standing with Jesus. This as well is not just sleep. What the writer here is not trying to say is that they were just falling asleep and they were kind of a little bit groggy. No. They were in the presence of God. And when you're in the presence of God, what happens? What happens if an angel were to show up here, right here? What would you do? Angels don't typically look like Precious Moments angels, right? What happens every time an angel appears in the Bible? What's the first thing the angel says? Oh, you guys listen to me. I love this. I love this. Do not be afraid, because they're scary. Because the presence and the holiness of God is scary. It's heaven and earth breaking in together, and here this is happening for them. They are reliving this idea that Jesus is going to be the Exodus for them, that he's going to take them from slavery into freedom. And it wasn't that they were physically tired, it was that they were spiritually tired. They had been walking with him for so long, and they wanted him to be their king, and he just wouldn't be their king. But now they're starting to get it. Once they were fully awake, they understood Moses and Elijah, Jesus, Exodus. This is all going to happen. God is going to be with his people through all this. He is going to save them. The Exodus journey is a microcosm of everything that Jesus did for us. Jesus fulfilled what the Exodus did so long ago, and he made it not just a physical freedom from slavery, but a spiritual one as well, a full human freedom in body and soul put together. So much so that because Jesus rose again, because he promises to come back one day, because when he does, everything will be made new again, we will be free to be the people God has created us to be fully and truly human in the best and greatest sense of the world, to live in a new creation with a sense of vocation, a sense of purpose, relationships that are perfect with those around us and with God. This is what Jesus brings. This is the freedom of the gospel. So until that day comes, how do we make that real today? That's our task. That's, as we people who are living stuck between the past and the future, our goal is to bring a bit of the future into the present, is to remember the past, know the future, and make those real right now. While he was still speaking up there on that mountain, God showed up. God showed up. The cloud appeared and covered them. They were afraid. The voice came from the cloud and said, "This is my son, whom I have chosen. Shema him." Listen to him. This is God's word for you today. You see Jesus. You know who he is. You know that he is here for you. You know that he has died for you and rose again on Easter just for you to give you life. See him. Listen to him. Focus on him. When all this ended, Christ was alone. Focus goes back to him. Week 1, stuck between. We know that we are in the wilderness. Like sometimes God puts us there for a decent reason. It's tough, it's difficult, no doubt. There's suffering, there's pain, but he's there. We feel exposed, we feel fear, but we know that God leads and provides for us. This is where the Exodus journey starts. This is what the people learned at the very beginning. And what that means is that as they started their Exodus journey and God gave them food and water and a path, that everything was going to go perfectly fine, right? That's how stories go, right? That's what lives are like. We have all the things that we need. Everything is just going to be perfect, right? You're like, I believe less than 50% of what you're saying, Pastor, at that point, right? Sarcasm is thick and heavy. We know that's not how it works. And that's not how it worked in the Exodus journey either. We're going to see over the next few weeks how God's people, as they went through these struggles, it teaches us a lot about who God is and how we can deal with our struggles today. But we'll get to those in the next few weeks.